The soldier returned home and heard his daughter screaming. He rushed into the room and saw something that turned his life upside down. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. David's boots touched the cracked sidewalk in front of the house he had memorized in his dreams, each detail sharper than the next. The slight tilt of the mailbox, the patch of grass that never quite matched the rest of the yard, the white porch light that flickered in the wind. He let his duffel bag slide down his shoulder, the fabric soaked from the drizzle that painted a silver sheen across the quiet street, the cold air biting at the edges of his jacket. He had imagined this return so many times during the long, hot months overseas, each vision ending with the small, warm weight of his daughter's arms around his neck, her laughter bright against his ear, her hair smelling of lavender shampoo, her voice whispering, "Daddy, you're home." Instead, the street was quiet, the wind pushing a plastic bag across the pavement, scraping softly against the curb, the windows of the house dull and cold. He paused before unlocking the front door, his hand hovering over the old brass handle. For a moment, he saw Elena, his late wife, in the reflection of the glass, her smile tilted, her eyes soft, the way she used to stand in the doorway waiting for him to come home. He closed his eyes, breathing out slowly before turning the handle, stepping into the house with the quiet care of a man who had learned to enter places where danger might hide in silence. The house was cold, cleaner than he remembered, the scent of lemon polish and synthetic lavender overwhelming, seeping into his skin as he set down his bag. He could hear a clock ticking in the kitchen, too loud in the stillness, and the sound of a single cabinet closing, the soft whoosh of air that followed, the faint click of glass against porcelain. He stepped forward, the wooden floors beneath him creaking softly, each footstep too loud in the silence, carrying memories of dirt roads and whispered orders, the way sand clung to sweat. He moved toward the living room, noticing the furniture arranged perfectly, the couch reupholstered in a pale gray fabric, the cushions aligned, a single throw draped with precise care. It felt like a museum, a space prepared for visitors, not for a child to live and breathe and spill her juice. Then he saw her. Layla stood near the staircase, clutching the arm of a small worn bear against her chest, its fur matted, one eye missing. Her hair was tied into small braids, but the ends were frayed, uneven, and her socks were mismatched. She didn't run to him as he had imagined so many nights, didn't shout, didn't drop the bear and fling herself into his arms. She stood there, dark brown eyes wide, unblinking, her lips parting slightly as if to say something, but closing again as her fingers tightened around the bear's arm. "Daddy," she whispered, and it was the smallest sound, the air carrying it like a prayer, brittle and quiet. He dropped to his knees, arms open, trying to smile, trying to keep his voice steady when he said her name, waiting for her to come closer. She took a single step, then another, her feet shuffling, the bear still pressed to her chest, her gaze darting past him to the kitchen, where he saw Mary, standing with a towel in her hands, her light hair pulled into a perfect bun, her eyes sharp, her mouth curving into a practiced smile that didn't touch her eyes. "David," she said, her voice warm but distant, "you're home early." Layla stopped in front of him, hesitating, and for a breathless moment he thought she might turn away. Then she leaned forward, her small arms wrapping around his shoulders, her face pressing into his neck. But there was no laughter, no quick, excited breath. He felt how light she was, how she didn't squeeze him tightly the way she used to, how her fingers trembled as they gripped the fabric of his jacket. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her hair, beneath the stale lavender of the house, beneath the synthetic cleanliness. The faint scent of childhood still clung to her, and it was almost enough to believe they could start again. Mary stepped closer, her smile tightening as she wiped her hands on the towel, her gaze flicking to Layla, then back to David. "I didn't expect you until tomorrow. Dinner's almost ready." David lifted Layla into his arms, feeling the way she stiffened before she settled against him, her head turning so she could see Mary. He kissed the top of her head, hoping she would relax, but she didn't, her small hand clutching the bear so tightly her knuckles whitened. He stood, adjusting her on his hip, and looked at Mary, trying to read her expression, but it was like looking into a painted picture, smooth and calm, nothing leaking through. "I got early leave," he said simply, letting Layla slide down to stand beside him, her hand still gripping the edge of his jacket. "Thought I'd surprise you." Mary nodded, folding the towel neatly, placing it on the counter. "Layla, sweetie, why don't you wash your hands for dinner?" Layla's eyes flickered to Mary, then to David, and she swallowed, her small shoulders rising and falling before she turned and walked toward the bathroom, the bear dangling from her hand, its fabric brushing against the floor. David watched her go, noticing the way she moved, cautious, as if afraid to take up too much space, the way she paused at the hallway's edge to look back, seeking his gaze before disappearing around the corner. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. Mary served the plates with practiced efficiency, placing them neatly in front of David and Layla, moving with a precision that felt rehearsed. The food was good, but it tasted like nothing to David, each bite mechanical as he watched Layla pick at her vegetables, her fork moving the pieces around without eating. Every time Mary moved, Layla's shoulders tensed, her gaze dropping to her plate, her lips pressing together. David tried to ask her about school, about her drawings, about the songs she used to love, but each answer was a soft, clipped word, a nod, a shrug. Mary would smile and say, "She's tired, David. She's had a busy day." And Layla would nod quickly, her eyes darting to Mary, then back to her plate. After dinner, Mary washed the dishes, the clink of ceramic, and the rush of water filling the silence. Layla sat on the couch, clutching the bear, staring at the floor, her legs swinging slightly, the only movement in the room. David sat beside her, reaching out to touch her hair, but she flinched, just a small movement, barely noticeable, before forcing a small smile, looking up at him with eyes that seemed too old, too tired for a child so small. He asked if she wanted to play the matching game they used to play, the one with the animal cards, and for a moment her eyes brightened. But then she glanced toward the kitchen, where Mary was drying a plate, her movements slowing as she listened. Layla shook her head, pressing the bear closer to her chest, her fingers curling around its matted ear. That night, David lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on him, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen the only sound. He heard it then, a soft cry, muffled, barely there, drifting through the thin walls like a ghost. He sat up, listening, the sound coming again, a small sob, the sound of a child trying not to be heard. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing slowly, the floor cold under his feet as he moved toward the door. Before he could reach it, Mary appeared in the doorway, her hand on the frame, her face calm, her hair still perfectly in place. "She has nightmares," she said softly, her eyes shadowed. "She always cries like this at night. It's nothing, David. She'll tire herself out." He looked past her, down the hallway, toward the room where his daughter was crying, the sound twisting in his chest, a pain that was worse than anything he had felt in the field, a helplessness that burned through him. He opened his mouth to speak, but Mary stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm, her touch light, almost comforting. "She needs to learn to sleep on her own," she continued, her voice gentle, almost sad. "If you go in now, it will only make it harder for her." David stood there, the weight of his training, his discipline, the years of following orders pressing against him as he stared into Mary's calm eyes, her hand warm on his arm. He nodded slowly, letting her guide him back toward the bedroom, the sound of Layla's soft sobs still drifting through the darkness, each one like a needle pressing into his skin. He lay back down, closing his eyes, but sleep did not come. He heard every sound, every rustle, every small cry, the bear's worn fabric brushing against the floor as Layla shifted, the creak of the bed as she tried to find a position to stop the tears. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, willing the sounds away. But they remained, echoing in the darkness, a promise that would not let him go. In the morning, Layla's eyes were puffy, her smile small and tight as she hugged the bear, her fingers tracing the seams as if checking to make sure it was still there. Mary handed her a lunchbox, reminding her to behave at school, to listen, to be good. Layla nodded, clutching the lunchbox with one hand, the bear with the other, standing at the door with her head down. David knelt beside her, lifting her chin gently with his finger, trying to find the light in her eyes that he remembered, the bright spark of his little girl. "Have a good day, baby," he whispered, kissing her forehead, breathing in the scent of her hair, the faint trace of lavender shampoo beneath the cold, clean smell of the house. Layla looked at him, her eyes searching his, and for a moment he thought she would say something, would tell him what the sobs meant, would let him in. But she pressed her lips together, nodded, and turned away, stepping out the door, the morning light spilling across her small frame as she walked to the car with Mary. David stood in the doorway, watching them drive away, the bear's arm hanging from the window as Layla looked back, her eyes meeting his for a single, fleeting moment before the car turned the corner, and she was gone. The street was quiet again, the wind stirring the leaves on the pavement, the porch light flickering softly in the gray dawn. He closed the door slowly, the click of the lock loud in the empty house, the silence pressing in around him as he stood in the hallway, staring at the space where his daughter had just been, the air still holding the echo of her small, tired breath. He turned, looking at the house, at the perfect furniture, at the spotless counters, at the cold, clean lines of a life that was supposed to be safe, supposed to be a home. But all he saw was the shadow of his daughter's eyes, the tremble in her hands, the fear in her small, soft sobs in the dark. David set his hand on the wall, closing his eyes, and for the first time since returning, he allowed himself to feel the fear, the anger, the sharp, relentless need to protect what was his. Outside, the morning moved on, the cars passed, the world kept turning. But inside, David made a promise, one he whispered to the empty air of the house, one he let settle deep into his bones, a promise that no matter what, he would find out what was wrong, he would protect his daughter, and he would not fail her. Not again. The morning sunlight that filled the kitchen felt artificial, too bright against the pale countertops that reflected the glare back into David's tired eyes. He stood by the sink, staring into the yard through the spotless glass, the dew still clinging to the grass, catching the light like tiny shards of glass. His coffee had gone cold in his hand, the bitter scent rising with the steam that no longer lifted from the mug. He could hear Layla's small footsteps behind him, the quiet shuffle of socks against wood as she entered the kitchen, the soft click of her bear's plastic eye tapping against the table when she sat down. Mary was already bustling around the kitchen, her movements efficient, her smile in place as she set down a plate in front of Layla, the scrambled eggs formed into a neat pile, the toast cut into perfect squares. Layla murmured a thank you, her eyes on the plate, her shoulders hunched as she picked up the fork, her small hand trembling just slightly, enough that David could see the edge of the toast quiver before she placed it in her mouth. Mary noticed, too, her eyes flickering toward Layla, her lips pressing into a thin line for a fraction of a second before she smoothed them into another smile. David watched as Layla ate quietly, the silence of the kitchen only broken by the soft clink of the fork against the plate, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. He tried to catch Layla's eyes, tried to smile, but each time her gaze met his, she flinched away, looking back down at her plate, forcing herself to chew slowly, swallowing each bite with careful precision as if afraid to make a sound. After breakfast, Mary helped Layla into her coat, straightening the collar with careful hands that lingered just a second too long, her fingers brushing against Layla's neck, and David saw the way Layla's shoulders stiffened, the way she held her breath until Mary stepped back, adjusting the sleeves as she nodded her approval. Layla clutched her bear in one hand, her other hand gripping the strap of her small backpack, her eyes darting to David, a quick glance, seeking something in his expression, but she looked away just as quickly. David offered to take Layla to school, but Mary insisted, her smile unwavering as she placed a kiss on his cheek, telling him to rest, to take it easy, to let her handle the morning routine. Layla didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply followed Mary to the car, her small frame almost hidden behind the backpack, the bear's head poking out from her grip as she paused at the door, turning to look at David, her lips parting as if she might say something, but the words never came. The door closed softly behind her, the car engine starting a moment later, the sound fading as they drove away, leaving David standing in the silence of the kitchen, the smell of breakfast still hanging in the air, the clock ticking in the steady beats that sounded too loud, too sharp. David spent the day trying to find distractions, unpacking his bags, folding his uniforms, sorting through the letters and small trinkets he had brought back for Layla. Each item felt heavy in his hands, reminders of promises he had made, of the plans he had envisioned for their reunion, of the laughter he thought would fill the house again. But the house was quiet, the air still, and the laughter he had imagined was absent, replaced by the memory of Layla's tired eyes and the stiffness in her small body when she hugged him. When Mary returned with Layla that afternoon, David noticed the way Layla lingered in the doorway, her eyes scanning the living room as if checking to see where Mary was before stepping fully inside. She clutched the bear to her chest, her small fingers tangled in its worn fur, and when David knelt to greet her, she managed a small smile, a quick flash that disappeared as soon as Mary stepped into the room, her presence shifting the air, tightening the silence until it felt like a rope around David's throat. They spent the evening in a quiet routine, dinner served with precision, Layla eating silently, her eyes on her plate, her movements small and careful. David tried to engage her, asking about her day, about school, about the book they used to read together, but each question was met with a soft, almost inaudible response, her eyes never lifting to meet his, her hands clutching the fork so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mary would smile, interjecting with comments about how Layla was tired, how she had been restless in class, how she needed to learn to focus, to listen, to behave. After dinner, Layla disappeared into her room, the door closing softly behind her, the sound echoing in the quiet house. David sat in the living room, the television playing a muted news report that he didn't watch, his eyes on the hallway where Layla's door remained closed, a barrier between them that felt thicker than the wood it was made of. Mary sat beside him, her hand on his knee, her smile constant, her voice calm as she spoke about mundane things, about groceries, about the neighbors, about plans for the weekend. Her words washing over him without meaning as his mind replayed the look in Layla's eyes, the small tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched when Mary entered the room. Later that night, as David passed by Layla's room, he paused, his hand on the doorknob, the urge to open it, to check on her, to hold her and promise her that she was safe almost overpowering. But he remembered the way Mary had spoken the night before, her voice soft but firm, telling him that Layla needed to learn to sleep alone, to grow up, to stop clinging to him, and he hesitated, his hand falling away from the door as he stood there, the hallway dark and cold around him. In the following days, David noticed the patterns that formed in the house, the way Layla moved, the way she kept to the edges of rooms, the way her eyes darted to Mary before she spoke, the way she flinched when a door closed too loudly, the way she seemed to fold into herself when Mary's voice rose, even slightly. He saw the way Mary's smiles turned sharp when Layla spilled a drop of juice, the way her hands gripped Layla's shoulders a little too tightly when adjusting her clothes, the way she spoke in a low voice that was calm but carried an edge that made Layla's eyes widen and her lips press together. One afternoon, David found Layla sitting in the hallway, her knees pulled up to her chest, the bear clutched tightly, her eyes red, her breathing quick and shallow. He knelt beside her, reaching out, but she flinched, her body recoiling before she realized it was him, her eyes filling with tears that she tried to blink away as she forced a small smile, whispering that she was okay, that she had just fallen, that she was sorry. Her sleeve slipped back, and David saw a small bruise on her wrist, a dark shadow against her skin, and when he gently took her hand to look closer, she tried to pull away, shaking her head, whispering that it was nothing, that she had tripped. That night, as he lay in bed, David stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on him, the silence filled with the echoes of Layla's soft sobs that he heard again, drifting through the house like a ghost. He couldn't ignore it anymore, couldn't convince himself that it was just nightmares, that it was just the adjustment to him being home again. The way Layla's eyes had looked when she saw the bruise, the fear that flashed across her face, the way she checked the hallway before speaking, all of it burned into his mind. The next morning, as Layla got ready for school, David noticed the way she hesitated when putting on her backpack, the way she winced slightly as the strap pressed against her shoulder. He moved to help her, lifting the strap gently, adjusting it so it wouldn't press against the bruise. And for a moment, she looked up at him, her eyes wide, a single tear slipping down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away, forcing a small smile as she whispered, "Thank you." Mary's voice cut through the moment, calling from the kitchen, reminding Layla not to forget her lunch, telling her to hurry, that they were going to be late. Layla's shoulders tensed, her eyes dropping as she nodded, clutching the bear tighter before setting it down, her fingers brushing against its worn fur as if she was saying goodbye before following Mary out the door. David stood there, the silence of the house pressing around him, the image of Layla's tear-streaked face lingering in his mind, the small, forced smile she had given him before leaving. He moved through the house, noticing the way everything was perfectly in place. The furniture aligned, the counters spotless, the air heavy with the scent of lemon cleaner, the cold, sterile scent that felt like a mask covering something rotten beneath. As the days passed, the cracks in the perfect image of their home widened. David noticed more bruises, small ones on Layla's arms, a fading mark on her cheek, scratches on her knees that she couldn't explain, her eyes always darting to Mary before she answered, her voice always soft, apologetic. He saw the way she avoided looking at herself in the mirror, the way she clutched her bear at night, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the way she seemed to shrink when Mary raised her voice even slightly. One afternoon, as David returned from a short run, he heard Mary's voice, sharp and cold, coming from Layla's room. He paused at the door, listening, his heart pounding as he heard Mary telling Layla that she was ungrateful, that she was lucky to have a home, that if she didn't behave, she would be sent away, that her father wouldn't love her if she kept being bad. Layla's soft sobs followed, her small voice whispering apologies, promises to be good, to try harder. David stood there, his fists clenching, his breath shaken as he listened, every instinct in him screaming to open the door, to pull Layla into his arms, to protect her. But he stayed, listening, letting the words sear into his mind, letting the reality of what was happening in his house settle into his bones, the promise he made to protect his daughter ringing in his mind with every soft cry that came from the other side of the door. That night, as he watched Layla eat her dinner silently, her eyes down, her movements careful, he made a decision. He would not let this continue. He would not let the cracks in their home become the wounds that would scar his daughter forever. He watched Mary, her smile in place, her voice calm as she spoke about mundane things, and he saw the truth beneath the surface, the sharpness in her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her hand gripped the back of Layla's chair just a little too tightly. David knew that he had to act, but he also knew that he had to be careful. He had seen what happened when people acted without thinking, the chaos, the destruction, the collateral damage. He would not let that happen to Layla. He would find a way to protect her, to save her, to bring back the light in her eyes, to give her the childhood she deserved, the safety she needed, the love that was her right. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet of the house, the faint sound of Layla's bear's plastic eye tapping against the floor as she shifted in her sleep, he closed his eyes and made a silent vow. He would not fail her. No matter what it took, he would protect his daughter, even if it meant tearing apart the illusion of their perfect home, even if it meant facing the darkness that hid behind Mary's smiles, even if it meant losing everything else. He would not fail her. The rain had started softly that evening, a gentle tapping against the windows that turned the streetlights outside into blurred halos in the darkness. David sat at the kitchen table, the glow from the small lamp above throwing shadows onto the walls that shifted with every movement, every sigh, every restless tap of his finger against the wood. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second a reminder that the day was slipping away, that another day had passed where he had seen the fear in Layla's eyes, the tremble in her hands, the way she shrank when Mary's voice cut through the air with a sharpness that made even him flinch sometimes. Mary had gone to bed earlier, saying she was tired, pressing a kiss to his cheek, her lips cold, her perfume lingering long after she had disappeared down the hallway. Layla had hugged him good night, her small arms wrapping around his waist, the bear pressed between them, her face tilted up toward him, eyes searching his as if trying to find something she couldn't quite name. He had kissed the top of her head, telling her he loved her, watching as she turned away, her shoulders hunched, her head down as she walked to her room, the bear dragging slightly along the floor. He stayed at the table long after the house had gone quiet, the rain turning into a steady rhythm against the windows, the world outside muffled and distant. His mind was a storm of thoughts, memories of Layla's laughter from before, the way she used to run to him when he came home from work, the way she would sing to her bear while playing, the way her eyes used to light up when he lifted her into the air, her giggles ringing out like music. Now, those memories felt like echoes from another life, shadows of a home that felt further away with each passing day. A sudden cry shattered the fragile silence, piercing through the sound of the rain. Sharp and raw, a child's cry that held fear so deep it made David's heart stop for a moment before it began to pound violently in his chest. He was on his feet before he realized it, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound harsh in the quiet house. His feet carried him down the hallway, each step quick, purposeful, driven by something primal and unstoppable. The cry came again, louder this time, a desperate, wordless sound that made every instinct in him flare, made every part of him focus on the single need to reach his daughter. He reached her door, his hand on the knob, turning it, but it didn't move. Locked. The realization hit him like a physical blow, the breath leaving his lungs in a sharp exhale as he rattled the knob, the sound loud, echoing in the hallway. He could hear her inside, her cries turning into muffled sobs, words breaking through the noise, words that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. "Please, please, I'm sorry, I'll be good, please." He stepped back, his mind clear, his body moving on instinct as he braced himself, lifting his leg and kicking the door near the handle. The wood splintered with a crack, the lock giving way as the door flew open, banging against the wall, the sound like thunder in the small room. Light from the hallway spilled into the darkness, revealing the scene inside with cruel clarity. Layla was curled up in the corner of the room, her small body shaking, her face streaked with tears, the bear clutched to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. Her nightgown was wrinkled, the thin fabric twisted around her legs, her hair sticking to her damp cheeks. A red mark was visible on her neck, bright against her dark skin, fresh and angry, a mark that had not been there before. Mary stood in the middle of the room, her face pale in the light, her eyes wide, her mouth open as if caught mid-sentence. In her hand, she held a pillow, her fingers gripping it so tightly her knuckles were white, the fabric crumpled where her hands had twisted it. For a moment, everything was still, the room frozen in that single breath where no one moved, where even the rain seemed to pause, the only sound Layla's soft, broken sobs. David stepped forward, dropping to his knees beside Layla, reaching out to her, his hand hovering over her shoulder before gently touching it, feeling the way she flinched under his touch, the way her body recoiled before she recognized him, her eyes lifting to his, wide and terrified, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She didn't pull away, but she didn't move closer either, her small hands clutching the bear so tightly he could see the fabric tearing near the seam. She was running around. She slipped and fell. She screamed. I was just trying to calm her down. Mary's voice cut through the air, shaky but controlled, trying to force calm into the chaos, her words too quick, too rehearsed, her eyes darting to David, then to Layla, then back again. She dropped the pillow, letting it fall to the floor, her hands lifting in a gesture of helplessness, her shoulders rising in a small, forced shrug. You know how she gets, overreacting, making a scene. David didn't look at her, his focus on Layla, on the tear-streaked face of his daughter, on the fear in her eyes, on the small, trembling hands that clutched the bear as if it was her only shield. He lifted her gently, feeling how light she was, how she didn't wrap her arms around his neck like she used to, how her head rested on his shoulder, her body limp, drained of the energy that should have been in a child of her age. He could feel the heat of her tears soaking into his shirt, the small, shaky breaths against his neck, the way her fingers twisted in the fabric of his sleeve. "You told me she was asleep," he said, his voice low, even, controlled. But inside he felt like he was being torn apart, every fiber of him screaming as he held his daughter, as he felt the fear radiating from her small body. Mary's face tightened, her lips pressing together before she spoke, her voice stiff. "She was. I was checking on her, and she woke up and started screaming. She's been so difficult lately. You know how hard it's been." David turned, carrying Layla out of the room, stepping past Mary, who moved aside, her eyes following them, her mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. He walked down the hallway, the light from the kitchen spilling onto the floor, the shadows stretching and twisting as he moved. He laid Layla down on the couch, pulling the throw blanket over her, tucking it around her small frame, brushing the damp hair away from her forehead, his fingers gentle, trembling as he touched the red mark on her neck as he felt her flinch under his touch. She didn't cry anymore, didn't make a sound, her eyes open, staring past him, her small hands clutching the edge of the blanket, her body curled around the bear as if trying to make herself smaller, to disappear into the fabric, into the safety she was trying so desperately to find. David turned, facing Mary, who stood at the edge of the living room, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes hard, her jaw clenched. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm, too calm, the words cutting through the air like a blade, demanding answers, demanding truth. Mary shook her head, her lips twisting into a small, bitter smile. "You're overreacting, David. She's a child. Children fall. Children cry. You've been gone for so long, you don't know how hard it's been, how much she tests me, how much she needs discipline." David didn't respond, turning back to Layla, sitting beside her, his hand resting on her small shoulder, feeling the way she tensed under his touch before slowly relaxing, just enough to let out a small, shaky breath, just enough to let her eyelids flutter closed for a moment before snapping open again, fear flashing across her face before she saw him, before she remembered where she was. He stayed there, sitting with her, the silence of the house pressing down around them, the rain still tapping against the windows, the shadows dancing on the walls. Mary stood across the room watching, her eyes cold, her face expressionless, her fingers tapping against her arm as she waited, as if daring him to say something, to challenge her, to break the fragile silence that had settled over the house like a heavy blanket. David leaned closer to Layla, his voice soft, a whisper meant only for her. "Talk to me, baby. Please." Layla's lips parted, her eyes blinking rapidly, tears welling up but not falling, her small hands twisting in the blanket, clutching the bear, pulling it closer to her chest. She shook her head, pressing her lips together, closing her eyes as if trying to shut out the world, as if trying to disappear. David felt the weight of that silence, the heaviness of her fear, the way it filled the room, the way it settled into the corners of the house, into the spaces between them. He knew then, without a doubt, that something was deeply wrong, that the home he had returned to was not the safe place he had imagined, that the cracks were deeper than he had allowed himself to see. He looked up, meeting Mary's gaze, seeing the challenge there, the defiance, the cold calculation in her eyes, and he knew that this was a battle he could not afford to lose. For Layla. For the small, fragile hope that still lingered in the way she looked at him, in the way she clung to the bear, in the way she still reached for him, even through her fear. David made a promise to himself in that quiet, heavy moment, as the rain continued to fall, as the clock on the wall ticked steadily, as Layla's breathing evened out into the soft, exhausted rhythm of sleep. He would find out the truth. He would protect his daughter. No matter what it took, no matter what he had to do, he would not fail her. Not again. The dawn after that night brought no comfort to David, only a pale gray light that crept into the house through the curtains and painted the walls in colors as tired as the eyes that watched them. Layla had fallen asleep at last, curled tightly on the couch with her bear pressed to her chest, her small face turned toward him even in her rest, as if afraid that he might disappear while she slept. David had stayed there all night, sitting near her, his back aching from the position, his eyes never leaving her, memorizing the soft rise and fall of her chest, the faint movements of her fingers clutching the bear, the tiny tremors that sometimes rippled through her as she drifted deeper into sleep. He had not spoken to Mary that morning. She had moved around the kitchen in silence, her steps controlled, her face carefully composed, her eyes flickering toward him from time to time, gauging, measuring, deciding. She had placed a plate of breakfast on the table without a word, the clink of ceramic on wood loud in the quiet, and then she had gone about preparing Layla's things for school, her movements precise, each action deliberate, as if she were performing for an audience that could end her world if it saw the wrong thing. David watched all of it with the same calm, heavy silence that had settled over him in the early hours of the morning, a silence that was not emptiness but a gathering storm, a focus so sharp it cut through every distraction, leaving only one purpose behind. He saw the way Layla flinched when Mary adjusted the collar of her coat, the way her eyes dropped when Mary's hand brushed against her hair, the way her small hands twisted the strap of her backpack as she waited for Mary to finish, her shoulders stiff, her breath held just for that moment, waiting for permission to exhale. He offered to take Layla to school, his voice even, steady, and for a moment, just a flicker, he saw something pass across Mary's face, a tightness around her mouth, a narrowing of her eyes, before the smile returned, bright and controlled as she nodded. "Of course," she said, stepping back, handing Layla her lunchbox, brushing her hair back one last time with a touch that made the child's shoulders tense again. "Have a good day, sweetie." Layla clung to his hand as they walked to the car, her small fingers cold despite the warmth of the morning, her eyes darting back toward the house before looking up at him, a question in her gaze that she could not put into words. He buckled her into the seat, smoothing her hair, kissing the top of her head, whispering that it would be okay, that she was safe, and though she nodded, though she tried to smile, the fear did not leave her eyes. As they drove to the school, Layla was quiet, holding the bear in her lap, stroking its worn fur with gentle fingers, her eyes fixed on the world outside, watching the trees and houses pass by, her reflection in the window a small, solemn ghost that seemed to be waiting for something she could not name. David glanced at her, wanting to speak, to ask her to tell him what was wrong, to promise her that he would fix it, that he would protect her, but he knew that words would not be enough, not now, not until she felt that they were more than promises made in the quiet of a moving car. When he dropped her off, she hugged him quickly, her arms barely reaching around his waist, her face pressed against his jacket for the briefest of moments before she pulled away, walking towards the school with her head down, her steps small and hesitant, the bear tucked under her arm. She turned once, halfway up the steps, looking back at him, her eyes meeting his, and in that moment, he saw it again, the flicker of hope, the silent plea that he would not leave, that he would come back, that he would be there when she returned. David watched her until the door closed behind her, until the noise of the morning swallowed the sight of her, before he turned back to the car, his mind already moving, already planning, already preparing for what he knew he had to do. At home, he waited until Mary had left for her errands, the sound of her car fading down the street, before he moved, quickly and quietly, his hands steady as he retrieved the small, hidden cameras he had purchased weeks ago, before he had found the courage to use them. He placed them carefully, in corners of Layla's room, in the hallway, in the living room where Mary often sat with her, reading to her in a voice that was too sweet, too controlled, a voice that made Layla sit too still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide and unblinking. He placed a small microphone inside the bear, stitching it carefully beneath the patch of fur that was already coming loose, whispering an apology to the bear, to Layla, to the small innocents that had already suffered too much. He tested the equipment, checked the feeds, adjusted the angles, making sure that every corner, every shadow, every quiet moment was captured, recorded, preserved, not as a violation of privacy, but as a shield, as proof, as protection. That night, he pretended that nothing had changed. He ate dinner quietly, watching as Mary served Layla her food, watching the small, almost invisible winces when Mary corrected her posture, when she moved the glass closer, when she touched her shoulder with a firm, controlling grip masked as a motherly gesture. Layla ate quietly, each bite small, her eyes fixed on the plate, her hands trembling just enough that David could see it, could feel the rage rising in him like a tide, kept back only by the knowledge that he needed to wait, that he needed to be patient, that he needed to protect her the right way. After dinner, Layla went to her room, clutching the bear, sitting on the floor near her bed, coloring in a small book, her legs crossed, her head bent over the page, the bear beside her, watching with its one eye, silent and constant. Mary hovered near the door, watching, commenting on how Layla needed to hurry, needed to finish, needed to go to bed on time, her voice calm, too calm, a command hidden in every word and every smile. David watched from the hallway, the image captured by the camera in the corner, the microphone and the bear picking up every word, every small, trembling breath, every soft apology from Layla, every sharp correction from Mary. He watched as Layla flinched when Mary raised her voice slightly, as she dropped the crayon and scrambled to pick it up, her hands shaken, her eyes wide with fear. Later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, when Mary had gone to bed with a satisfied smile and a careful kiss on his cheek, when Layla's room was dark except for the small nightlight shaped like a moon, David sat in his room with the laptop open, the screen glowing softly, her steps small and careful, as if she was afraid the world might notice her if she moved too quickly. In the car, he watched her in the mirror, saw the way she held the bear to her face, breathing in the scent of the worn fur as if it could protect her from everything waiting outside. When he parked near the school, he turned to her, reaching back to brush a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes met his, wide and dark, full of something that was almost trust, but still carrying the fear that had become part of her, woven into the way she breathed, into the way she held herself. He smiled softly, trying to make her believe it was real, that he would keep her safe, that the world could be kind again. She nodded once, stepping out of the car, her small hand lifting to wave before she turned and walked toward the doors, her bear held tightly under her arm, her steps steady but cautious. David watched until she disappeared inside, until the doors closed and the noise of the morning traffic swallowed the moment. Then he drove away, his mind clear, his hands steady on the wheel as he made his way to the quiet building where he would sit across from a lawyer who had once been a friend, a man who had held his hand over David's shoulder and told him congratulations when Layla was born, who had laughed with him in the waiting room, who had promised to always help if he could. The office was cold, the air conditioned to an uncomfortable chill, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall loud in the silence between them. David sat across the desk, the lawyer's eyes scanning the papers, the reports, the carefully printed photographs of the small bruises on Layla's arms, the transcript of the recordings, the small details that told the story of what was happening in a house that looked perfect from the outside. "Are you ready for what this will mean?" the lawyer asked, his voice quiet, cautious, carrying the weight of a man who had seen too many families tear apart in the silence that followed decisions like these. David nodded once, his hands folded tightly, his eyes steady. "I can't let it continue," he said, the words quiet but stronger than the fear that had held him in place for too long. The lawyer explained the steps, the documentation, the requests for emergency intervention, the involvement of social services, the way the system would watch every movie David made, the way it would judge him, question him, measure him against every rule written for the protection of children who could not speak for themselves. David listened, his mind absorbing every detail, filing it away, preparing for what would come. That afternoon, he picked up Layla from school, watching her as she came down the steps, her eyes searching the parking lot until they found him, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth before she ran to him, the bear bouncing against her side with each step. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly for a moment, and he lifted her, letting her rest her head on his shoulder, breathing in the soft, warm scent of her hair, feeling the small, strong beat of her heart against his chest. They went for ice cream, sitting on a bench near the park, the late afternoon sun painting the world in gold as Layla licked the melting treat, the chocolate smudging on her lips, her laughter quiet but real as a breeze lifted her hair and made her giggle. David watched her, memorizing the way the light touched her face, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked up at him, the way her small hand reached for his as she told him about a story she had read in class, about a princess who had found her way home. He knew that moments like these were what he was fighting for, what he was protecting, what he was willing to risk everything to save. When they returned home, Mary was waiting, her eyes sharp as they stepped through the door, the smile on her face tight as she greeted them, her gaze moving to Layla before returning to David with a question he did not answer. Layla moved quickly, slipping past Mary, heading to her room, the bear held against her chest, the door closing softly behind her. The evening was quiet, the air in the house thick with the unspoken tension, each movement measured, each word carefully chosen. David watched Mary as she moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner, her back straight, her hands working with practiced efficiency, the smile on her face never reaching her eyes. They ate in silence, Layla's small voice offering quiet thank yous, her eyes on her plate, her hands steady as she lifted each bite, chewing carefully, swallowing slowly, her small body still as she listened for every sound, every shift in the room. That night, After Layla was in bed, her small body curled around the bear, her breathing soft and even as she slept, David sat in the dark of the living room, the glow from the streetlights outside casting long shadows across the floor. He held the papers in his hands, the documents that would begin the process, the evidence that would protect his daughter, the plan that would keep her safe. Mary stepped into the room, her arms crossed, her eyes on him, the silence between them heavy with everything that had not been said. "You're different since you came back," she said quietly, her voice calm, but there was a tremor there, a hesitation that betrayed the control she held so tightly. "You're making things difficult." David looked up at her, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "I'm doing what I need to do." Her lips pressed together, her eyes narrowing, but she said nothing else, turning away, walking down the hallway to the bedroom, the sound of her steps fading as the door closed. David sat there for a long time, the papers in his hands, the quiet of the house wrapping around him, the memory of Layla's laughter in the park echoing in his mind, the promise he had made to her, to himself, to Elena, that he would protect their child, that he would not let her grow up in fear, that he would not let her lose the light in her eyes. He stood, moving down the hallway to Layla's room, opening the door quietly, the soft glow of the nightlight illuminating the small, peaceful figure on the bed, the bear held tightly in her arms, her face relaxed in sleep, the shadows under her eyes softer in rest. He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, leaning down to kiss her gently, whispering that he loved her, that she was safe, that he would always protect her. As he stepped back, Layla stirred, her eyes fluttering open, blinking sleepily as she looked up at him. For a moment, there was confusion, fear, but then her eyes cleared, recognizing him, and she smiled, small and tired but real, her hand reaching out to take his, holding it tightly as she whispered, "Daddy." David squeezed her hand, holding it for a moment before letting her drift back to sleep, her breathing evening out, her grip loosening as her hand slipped back to rest on the bear. He stood there, watching her, letting the promise settle into him, letting the decision he had made strengthen the quiet resolve that held him steady. He turned off the light as he left, leaving the door open just a crack, the way she liked it, the way she had asked, so she could see the light from the hallway, so she would know he was there, that he would not leave, that she was not alone. In the quiet of the night, with the papers prepared, the plan ready, the proof gathered, David let himself breathe, let himself believe that this was the beginning of something new, something safer, something that would allow Layla to grow without fear. He knew it would be hard, that the days ahead would test him, would try to break him, would demand everything from him, but he would not fail her, not again. The morning came heavy with clouds, the air thick and still as if the world itself was holding its breath. David stood at the window in the living room watching the slow drift of the gray sky, the gentle sway of the trees along the sidewalk, the soft rustle of leaves that seemed too quiet, too careful, as if the day knew what was about to happen within the walls of the house it watched. The documents were ready, signed and filed, the calls made, the arrangements confirmed with the lawyer and the social worker who had spoken to David the day before with a tone that mixed caution with urgency, a tone that made it clear they had seen cases like this before, that they understood the need for calm and precision, that they trusted him to be steady when the time came. Mary moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, her hair pulled back, her smile soft as she prepared breakfast, the clatter of dishes carefully controlled, each sound measured, Each word she spoke to Layla, wrapped in a quiet insistence that would have sounded like care to anyone who did not know how the tension in the child's shoulders betrayed the truth. Layla sat at the table, her bear in her lap, her small fingers twisting the fabric around its arm, her eyes down, her mouth moving silently as she nodded to Mary's instructions about eating, about cleaning up, about putting on her shoes quickly, about not dropping crumbs on the floor. David watched them, letting the scene imprint itself in his memory, every detail, every breath, every small twitch in Layla's hand, every narrowing of Mary's eyes when the girl's fingers hesitated, every moment that passed in the heavy silence between the three of them. He sat at the table, drinking coffee that had gone cold, feeling the warmth of the cup against his palms, grounding himself in the familiar shape, the roughness of the ceramic, the simple weight of it as he prepared for what was coming. After breakfast, Mary reached to adjust Layla's jacket, pulling it straight with careful fingers, her smile tight as she brushed a strand of hair behind the child's ear, her hand lingering for just a second too long, pressing against Layla's shoulder with that gentle firmness that made the girl wince before hiding it behind a small, quick smile. David saw it all, the flinch, the forced calm, the way Layla's eyes darted to him for the briefest moment before dropping to the floor again, the small hope in them buried under layers of fear. David offered to take Layla to school, his voice calm, even, and Mary paused for a moment, the smile on her face freezing before she nodded, stepping back, allowing Layla to slip past her toward the door. Layla held the bear close to her chest, her small hand reaching for David's, gripping it tightly as they stepped outside, the morning air cool against their skin, the silence between them filled with everything they could not say as they walked to the car. As they drove, Layla watched the world outside, her reflection in the window superimposed on the passing houses, the trees, the gray sky that seemed to press down on the world. Her small voice broke the silence once, a whisper so soft he almost missed it, asking if he would be there when she came home. David reached back, brushing his fingers against her small hand, promising her with quiet words that he would always be there, that she did not have to be afraid, that today would be different. She nodded, clutching the bear to her chest, pressing her face against its soft fur, her eyes closing for a moment, as if she was letting herself believe him, letting herself hope that the promise would hold, that the day would bring something better than the fear that had become her constant shadow. He watched her as she stepped out of the car at the school, her small frame turning to look at him one last time, her eyes meeting his with that quiet trust that made his chest tighten, that made him promise himself again that he would not fail her, not now, not ever. He did not drive home immediately. Instead, he parked on a quiet street, his hands on the steering wheel, the engine off, the world outside moving in its slow, indifferent rhythm as he prepared himself, as he rehearsed the words he would say, the actions he would take, the calm he would hold when the moment came. He checked his phone, the message from the social worker clear. "We will arrive at 8 a.m. sharp. Be ready. Be calm. Let us handle it." When he returned home, Mary was in the kitchen, humming softly as she washed the dishes, the sound of the water running masking the soft click of the door as he entered. She turned, smiling at him, her eyes searching his face, her hands wiping on the towel she held, her head tilting slightly as she asked if he had given Layla her lunch, if she had remembered to say thank you, if she had smiled before going into the school. David answered quietly, each word calm, each breath controlled, his eyes steady as he watched her, as he let the moments pass in the silence that followed, the ticking of the clock loud in the stillness of the room. The knock on the door was soft, measured, 3 firm raps that broke the calm, that shifted the world around them as Mary's head turned, her eyes narrowing for just a moment before she smoothed her face into that careful smile, stepping toward the door with the towel still in her hand. David moved faster, reaching the door before her, opening it to the social worker, a woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, the badge on her vest clear, the presence of the 2 uniformed officers behind her a silent promise that this would not be stopped, that this would not be turned away. Mary froze, the towel dropping from her hands to the floor, the smile breaking as her eyes widened, her mouth opening to speak, to question, to protest. But the social worker stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding, as she explained the reason for their presence. The emergency welfare check authorized by the court, the evidence reviewed, the necessity of ensuring the safety of the child. David stood to the side, his eyes on Mary, seeing the rage rise in her face, the denial, the quick flash of calculation as she turned to him, her voice rising, sharp, accusing, demanding explanations, calling him a traitor, calling him a liar, telling the officers that this was a mistake, that Layla was fine, that she was her mother, that David was confused, that he was unstable, that he was damaging their family. The officers remained calm, their voices steady as they informed her that she needed to step aside, that she needed to remain calm, that resisting would only make things worse. Mary's eyes flashed, her hands balling into fists as she shook her head, her voice breaking as she screamed that they could not take her child, that she would not allow it, that this was her home, her life, her family. David did not speak, did not move, did not react to the words she threw at him, to the accusations, to the screams, to the tears that came too quickly, too perfectly, falling down her face as she turned to the social worker, begging, pleading, demanding that they leave, that they see reason, that they understand how hard she had worked to keep everything perfect. The social worker remained steady, her eyes kind but unwavering as she informed Mary that Layla was not in the house, that she was safe, that she was being spoken to by a child advocate at the school, that arrangements were already in place for her protection, that this was not a negotiation, that this was the law, that this was the consequence of actions that could no longer be hidden. Mary fell silent then, her face crumpling as she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face as she sobbed, a sound echoing in the quiet house, a sound that once would have pulled at David's heart, that once would have made him reach for her, comfort her, believe her. But now it was just noise, just another mask falling away, just another piece of the illusion breaking under the weight of truth. David stepped outside, the air cool against his skin, the sky still heavy with the promise of rain, the world feeling strangely quiet as the officers remained inside to finish their work, to ensure the safety of the environment, to document the scene for the reports that would follow, for the hearings that would come, for the process that would now begin. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and when he answered, the voice of the social worker at the school was soft but firm, informing him that Layla was safe, that she had been quiet, that she had answered their questions with small, careful words, that she had held the bear tightly, that she had asked if her father was coming for her, if she could go home with him. David's voice was steady as he replied, telling them that he was on his way, that he would be there soon, that he would take her home. When he arrived at the school, Layla was waiting in the small office, her legs swinging above the floor as she sat in the chair, the bear clutched against her chest, her eyes lifting when she saw him, wide and searching, filled with tears that did not fall, her mouth trembling as she whispered, "Daddy?" He knelt in front of her, opening his arms, and she was there in a moment, her small body pressing against him, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face burying into his shoulder as she finally let out the breath she had been holding. As the tears finally came, as the small sobs shook her body, as he held her, whispering softly that she was safe, that she was okay, that he was there, that he would not let go. They walked out together, her small hand in his, the bear in her other arm, the world outside gray and cool, the air fresh with the promise of rain. But the storm that had been inside them was lifting, clearing, leaving behind the quiet, fragile hope that this was the beginning of something better. David lifted her into the car, buckling her in, brushing the tears from her cheeks as she looked at him, her eyes tired but clear, the fear still there but no longer alone, replaced by the quiet trust that he had seen in the park, that he had seen when she had turned to wave before school, that he had promised to protect. As he drove, Layla leaned against the window, the bear pressed to her face, her eyes closing as she whispered softly, "Are we going home now?" David glanced at her, his voice soft, steady, full of the promise he would keep. "Yes, baby, we're going home." And for the first time in a long time, Layla smiled, small and tired but real, as the car moved forward into the day, carrying them both toward the life that was waiting for them, the life that they would build together, free from the shadows, free from fear, held together by the quiet, unbreakable promise that he would protect her, always, no matter what. The house was smaller than the one they had left behind, a simple two-bedroom place with creaking floorboards that smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood, with a small fenced yard that let in the light through the broken slats of the fence David had promised himself he would fix when the time was right. It was quiet here, not the heavy quiet of a home filled with fear and cold silences, but a soft quiet that made space for breathing, for the sound of a child's footsteps on the floor, for laughter that was learning to return in small, careful pieces. The day they moved in was warm, the sun pressing through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of grass and the hum of the neighborhood waking up around them. Layla stood in the middle of her new room, the bear in her arms, her small eyes scanning the space as if she was memorizing the corners, the way the light hit the walls, the way her footsteps sounded against the bare floor. She didn't say much that day, but she didn't flinch when David came close to help her place her books on the shelf they had found at a thrift store, or when he helped her tuck her bear into the small bed that had been hers in the old house, but seemed softer here, safer somehow, surrounded by the warmth that came from a place that promised no one would raise their voice at her in fear. No one would grab her wrist with two tight fingers. No one would tell her she was not enough. David spent the first few days unpacking in quiet moments, letting Layla wander the house as she needed, letting her get used to the creaks and shadows, the way the wind rattled the windows at night, the way the branches of the tree outside her window brushed against the glass when it rained. He made pancakes in the mornings, burning the edges sometimes and laughing quietly when Layla giggled behind her small hands, watching him scrape the charred pieces into the trash and promise he would get better. She began to laugh more often, soft sounds at first that came like bubbles breaking the surface of still water, then fuller, brighter, enough to echo in the small kitchen, enough to draw a smile from David, even on days when exhaustion from paperwork and court preparations weighed on him. She returned to school slowly, the first few days clinging to him at the door, her small hand gripping his so tightly he could feel the tremor of fear that had not yet left her bones, the way her eyes scanned the street to ensure there was no one coming for her. Each day, he promised her he would be there when she returned, that he would wait in the car if she needed him to, that he would never leave without her. and each day she nodded, letting him go a little sooner, walking into the building with small steps, pausing to look back until she saw his reassuring nod, until she could turn and walk through the door with the bear tucked safely in her backpack. The court days were quiet battles fought in rooms that smelled of old files and stale air, where David sat across from people who asked careful questions about Layla, about the recordings, about the nights when the house had become a place of whispered apologies and hidden tears. The lawyers spoke firmly, presenting the evidence they had gathered with calm precision, while David sat with his hands folded, answering questions with quiet honesty, never raising his voice, never letting the emotion that churned in him break the careful composure he knew would help keep Layla safe. The judge's gaze was steady, the woman's eyes sharp but kind as she listened, as she read the reports from the social worker, as she considered the soft statements Layla had given with her bear in her arms, her small voice trembling but clear when she told them about the night she had hidden in her closet, about the whispers that had scared her, about the promises she had made to herself to stay quiet so the monster would not come. In those moments, David thought about Elena, about the promise he had made to her in the hospital the day Layla was born, when he had held the tiny, crying bundle in his arms and whispered that he would protect her, that he would give her a life of safety and love, that he would be the father she needed. He thought of how he had failed for a time, how he had allowed another's darkness to reach into his daughter's world, and how every day since he had fought to take that promise back, to repair what had been broken, to show Layla that she was never alone, that she was always worth protecting. When the court finally ruled in his favor, granting him full custody, the paperwork complete and the signatures inked onto the official forms, David sat in the car for a long moment outside the courthouse, the papers on the seat beside him, his hands gripping the steering wheel as a slow breath left him, as the tightness in his chest eased, as he let himself believe that the fight was over, at least for now. He drove to Layla's school, arriving early, sitting in the car as he had promised, waiting for her to walk out, her small face scanning the cars until she saw him, her steps quickening, her eyes lighting up as she ran the last few steps to him, the bear bouncing against her side as she threw her arms around his waist. They went for ice cream that afternoon, sitting in the small shop near the park, the air cool with the scent of vanilla and sugar, the quiet hum of families and children filling the space around them. Layla chose strawberry with rainbow sprinkles, her laughter soft but sure as she told David about the book they were reading in class, about the art project she was working on, about the friend who had invited her to play on the swings during recess. David listened, letting each word soak into him like warmth, letting the brightness in her eyes reassure him that he had done the right thing, that she was healing, that she was learning again to live in a world where fear did not follow her like a shadow. At home, Layla drew pictures that she taped to the refrigerator with mismatched magnets, drawings of houses with flowers in the windows, of stick-figure people holding hands under a sun that took up half the page, of a bear with a crooked smile sitting next to a little girl with curly hair. Each drawing was a piece of her finding its place again, a small declaration that this was her home now, that this was where she could grow and laugh and be safe. David kept every drawing, smoothing out the wrinkles when the paper caught on the edge of the fridge, letting them become a quiet testament to the promise he had made, to the life they were building together. At night, Layla asked if he would leave the door open, just a crack, enough for the light from the hallway to reach her, enough so she could see him sitting on the couch with a book, enough so she would know he was there. Sometimes, when nightmares woke her, she would call out softly, and David would be there in an instant, sitting on the edge of her bed, brushing the hair from her forehead, whispering to her that she was safe, that no one would hurt her, that the monsters were gone. She would fall asleep again, her small hand curled around his, the bear pressed to her chest, her breathing evening out as the fear eased from her body. David found a job that allowed him to be home when Layla returned from school, working from the small desk in the corner of the living room, taking calls and answering emails as he watched her do her homework, as he listened to her hum softly to herself, as he helped her with math problems that made her wrinkle her nose in confusion before her face broke into a smile when she understood. They cooked dinner together, simple meals that sometimes ended in laughter when the rice boiled over, or when flour dusted the floor as they rolled out dough for cookies they would eat warm, the chocolate melting on their fingers as they sat on the floor, the crumbs catching in the folds of the blanket they used when they watched movies together in the evenings. They visited the park on weekends, Layla's laughter carrying across the playground as she climbed the jungle gym, as she swung high on the swings, her feet kicking at the sky, her face turned upward to the sun. David watched, always near, letting her find her freedom, letting her discover the joy in the wind against her face, in the small victories of reaching the top of the slide, in the simple, unburdened moments that childhood should have been from the start. At night, before bed, Layla would sometimes crawl into his lap, the bear tucked under her arm, her eyes heavy with sleep as she listened to him read the stories Elena had once loved, the pages turning softly as his voice filled the room, as the words wrapped around them both in a promise of safety, of love, of a home that would not break. She would fall asleep there sometimes, her breathing soft against his chest, the weight of her small body a reminder of everything that mattered, of everything he had fought for, of everything he would continue to protect. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold and purple across the sky, Layla brought him a drawing she had made. A simple picture of a house with a tree beside it, a swing hanging from one of the branches, a figure of a man standing next to a small girl holding a bear, both of them smiling, the word home written in large, uneven letters across the top of the page. She handed it to him with a shy smile, her eyes bright as she whispered, "For you, Daddy." David took the drawing, his throat tightening as he looked at it, as he looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, at the trust that had returned, at the love that had survived everything they had faced. He pulled her into a hug, holding her close, kissing the top of her head as he whispered back, "Thank you, baby. I love it." And in that moment, in the quiet of the small living room filled with the soft light of the setting sun, David knew that they were home, truly home, in a way that no place had been since Elena had died, in a way that no house could be, until the fear was gone, until the laughter returned, until the promise of safety was kept. Here, in this small, imperfect place, with its creaking floors and its chipped paint, with its second-hand furniture and mismatched dishes, with the drawings taped to the fridge and the sound of Layla's laughter echoing through the rooms, they had found their new beginning. They had built something stronger than the fear that had tried to take them, something softer than the anger that had threatened to break them, something that would carry them forward, day by day, into a life where Layla could grow, where she could heal, where she could be a child, safe and loved. And David knew, as he tucked her into bed that night, as he left the door open just a crack, as he turned off the light and let the soft glow of the hallway fall across her peaceful face, that he would never stop protecting this home, that he would never stop fighting for the light in her eyes, that he would never fail her again. Not ever. If you found this story meaningful, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Check out the next videos on the channel and feel free to share this video with someone who needs to see it. Thank you for watching.